On the 2nd of February 2019, Jason Schreier, who was probably the only journalist left on Kotaku worth his salt. I mean, the guy may have a thin skin on Twitter and he's quick to ban you, but overall, his articles are usually the only reason to check out Kotaku. It read out like maybe the Miller Report for video games, you know? Like Watergate. The level of stuff that was here was nothing short of staggering. Omissions that would have left you surprised years ago, but in today's gaming climate, it was par for the course. Crunch hours, a game that was in development for 6 years, but was only worked on for around 18 months tops. I will try my best to condense this, as it is a very long article. I think like the Dead Sea Scrolls are shorter than this article from Jason Schreier. That's how much shit is here. He spent months gathering information about this. One excerpt reads, perhaps the most alarming, it's a story about a studio in crisis. Dozens of developers, many of them decades-long veterans, have left BioWare over the past 2 years. Many say they or their co-workers had to take stress leave, a doctor-mandated period of weeks or even months worth of vacation for their mental health. One former BioWare developer told me they would frequently find a private room in the office, shut the door, and just cry. And I quote, people were so angry and sad all the time. Depression and anxiety are an epidemic with BioWare. And you see that, and your anger towards Anthem starts to fade, and it moves into pity, at least in my case. I'd sit there and think, my God, how bad could it have been? How much worse did it get? Because when you look at these game development cycles, they always give us these trailers and these little AMAs, and they all play it off as if everything is in hand. It's absolutely and totally in control. When developers leave, they don't tell you why they're leaving. They're just like, oh, it was time for me to move on. But they don't sit there and go, well, shit hit the fan at BioWare, and after my 15th cry fit for the day, I figured it's time I got the hell out of Dodge before I killed myself. I knew that when I was trying to use papers to cut my risk, there was trouble in paradise. There's another excerpt that says, I cannot count the amount of stress casualties we had on Mass Effect Andromeda or Anthem. A stress casualty at BioWare means someone had such a mental breakdown from stress, they're just gone for 1 to 3 months. Some come back, some don't. It would almost make you think, like, where is gaming going in the future? Like, there couldn't possibly be anybody who wants to be a developer anymore. When you see games like this that have all this promise and they show these trailers and you think, wow, this is amazing. Game development must be great. But then the actuality is it's a horrible mess of people working like slaves on a game with no direction. Then why would you want to be a game developer? Hell, I think it's more lucrative to be a Twitch streamer at this point. Then if the game developers dry up, what the fuck are most of those Twitch streamers gonna do? I guess the thoughts would be fine. They just dance around and shit. Another part reads, among those who work or have worked at BioWare, there's a belief that something drastic needs to change. Many at the company now grumble that the success of 2014's Dragon Age Inquisition was the worst thing that could have happened to them. The third Dragon Age of which won Game of the Year in 2014 at the Game Awards, which really doesn't mean much, the Game Awards. I mean, the Game Awards suck. Was a result of brutal production processes plagued by indecision and technical changes. It was mostly built over the course of the final years, which led to lengthy crunch hours and lots of exhaustion. And I quote, some of the people in Edmonton were so burnt out, they were like, we need Dragon Age Inquisition to fail in order for people to realize that this isn't the right way to make games. I honestly didn't feel Dragon Age Inquisition was that great. None of the Dragon Ages were able to live up to Dragon Age Origin, in my opinion. But then again, most of the guys who made Dragon Age Origin are gone. So it would make sense I didn't care for the newer iterations. But I will admit, Inquisition at least was a step forward, whereas the Dragon Age 2 was a step back. That was a horrible fucking game. And I had no idea that these sort of crunch time hours went on with Dragon Age. Once again, most of these game developers keep this veneer, and game publishers, this veneer of like everything is fine. It's like a broken home. Literally, people like the Jackson 5. Everybody thought the Jackson family got along. They were nice, lovely people. Meanwhile, Joe Jackson's punching the shit out of Tito and throwing him through a goddamn window. And apparently the success was detrimental to BioWare in and of itself, which is weird. Because when you think about it, Andromeda failed and nothing changed with BioWare. They still seem to continue this crunch even with Anthem, even though we didn't get that far in the article. But now that Anthem and the last Mass Effect failed, would this actually lead to a change for BioWare? I highly doubt it after reading this article, because later on it didn't, pretty much says the next Dragon Age is following the same patterns of previous games. So I have a feeling nothing is going to change. The next part, the article talked about BioWare magic. This is a term where it's believed that no matter what or how rough game productions got or might be, things would always come together in the final months. The game would always coalesce. It happened with the Mass Effect trilogy, and it happened on Dragon Age Origins and on Inquisition. A veteran BioWare developer liked to refer to the production as a hockey stick. It just floats for a while and then suddenly jolts upward. It also says that the failures of Mass Effect Andromeda has made it clear that the current and former BioWare employees, this attitude no longer is working. Reading this, you got the feeling, the view, that many of the BioWare heads just felt like no matter what happens, the magical BioWare magic fairy will come and bless us with good tidings and success. Despite the fact that employees were leaving, quitting, having emotional and mental breakdowns, the top brass was pretty much like, don't worry about it. It'll all work out in the end. You just gotta believe. No matter how bad the Frostbite engine fucks up, it'll come together in the end. Another point in the article, which is weird, this is probably one of the worst ideas I've ever read. At the beginning, they called it Dylan. In late 2012 and 2013, while finishing up Mass Effect trilogy, BioWare director Casey Hudson and a small team of longtime Mass Effect developers started working on a project that they hoped would be like the Bob Dylan of video games, meaning something that would be referred by video game fans for years to come. To call anything Dylan seems like a bad thing to me. I mean, if you ever Googled YouTube videos, like for instance, Vince Neil's the new Bob Dylan or something, where you see him on stage, he's fat as fuck, he looks like Cartman from South Park, and he's singing Kickstart My Heart, but you don't understand a lyric he's saying, and it's more funny than anything, and sad, compared to what Motley Crue used to be. And at one point, you're watching a video, and you see Nikki Sixx, the bass player, laughing his ass off at Vince Neil's horrible performance. And it's Dylanism. I would never want to be called Bob Dylan or referred to as Dylan. That's like when you're so incoherent, no one knows what the hell you're doing or saying, but since you used to be something great, people let it slide. But if you saw someone walking around on the streets talking like Bob Dylan, you'd think he was retarded, which I don't think you can say on YouTube anymore, but whatever. So right there, it's a scary idea to call anything Dylan. I would have said Stairway to Heaven. The sad thing is, as you read this, you realize that the original idea for Anthem was amazing. The concept that they had was a dangerous, hazardous planet filled with enemies and so on. It was a hostile world with heavy gravitational pull. So a lot of alien ships and stuff would crash there, and these people were stuck. It was called a realistic NASA-inspired robot suit. The pitch was simply Iron Man, but less cartoony. Which, when you look at Anthem, the first thing you think is Iron Man. It's literally like just a whole bunch of Iron Man shit. I mean, you got, the Ranger class, which looks like Iron Man. Then you got the Heavy class, which looks like the Hulkbuster armor. Like, come on, dude. The design choices there were just like so blatant. But then again, the original idea was stripped away, and what we were left with were the ideas that Patrick Sutherland thought were cool. The developer said, "You were at the bottom of the food chain, and everything was significantly more powerful than you," said one person who worked in the game. This idea already sounds great. It was like they were making comparisons to Dark Soul and Darkest Dungeon and even Shadow of the Colossus. There would be big, scary creatures out in the world, and your job would be to see how long you could survive. One prototype allowed players to attach themselves to a giant monster. Others centered on the atmosphere and weather and the environmental effects. Right here, just looking at this, the pitch just seems amazing. What we got, in contrast to what was originally conceived, was so sadly horrible. And I would say that it's not really the developer's fault too much on this, because later in the article, as I'm jumping very far ahead, they were forced to use the Frostbite engine. And as I've said tons of times before, the Frostbite engine is fine for Battlefield games. But for world building, I don't think it's not the way to go. It's not. But I'll move on to that later. They talked even more about examples of things you do. It would be very squad-based play, the original Anthem. One idea was you go to a volcano where you'd have to figure out why it was erupting, kill some creatures, and fight your way back out. That was the main hook. As the ball was rolling on Anthem, Jason Schreier then notes and makes it clear that the Anthem team faced major shakeups. In August of 2014, as they continued to prototype the dream about their game, they lost their leader, Casey Hudson, who had directed the beloved Mass Effect trilogy and was supposed to be the creative director for Anthem, was departing. The foundation of our IP in Edmonton was complete, he wrote in a letter to the studio, and the team is ready to move forward into pre-production on a title that I think will redefine interactive entertainment. My God, was he wrong. John Warren, a relatively new hire who worked for Disney before joining EA in 2011, took on the role of game director. The article literally states that Casey Hudson and his Mass Effect team were like the Enterprise from Star Trek The Next Generation. For anyone who's watched Star Trek The Next Generation, you know how amazing the Enterprise was under Jean-Luc Picard. But him leaving was pretty much the equivalent of Jean-Luc Picard leaving the Enterprise and or dying. Now, what's funny with this analogy, with anyone who's watched Star Trek, if people are leaving, oh God, Gundam is now going to pontificate and wax poetically about Star Trek. The fact that if it was truly the Enterprise, then there should have been an, I don't know, Commander Riker who could have stepped in and took over things. There had to be, but apparently there wasn't a Commander Riker in the Mass Effect team. There was no Commander Data. If there was no Picard and no Riker, no Data, no Mr. Worf, really wasn't Enterprise, because there's no one who could have filled the role as lead. Apparently, once Casey Hudson left, the snowball of shit started rolling down the hill. As Mr. Leahy from the Trailer Park Boys would say,
listen, Bubs, hear that? Sounds of the whispering winds of shit.
Just came right in, and it didn't leave. The article says this funny part too. By comparison, they called the Dragon Age team a pirate ship, meandering from port to port until it reached the final destination. Now the Enterprise no longer has Jean-Luc Picard. Once again, there is no Riker or anything else. This is not really a glowing recounting of the game. David Geider was looking to basically turn Anthem from a survival, futuristic NASA game into the standard fare BioWare game. This led to dissension in the groups of the BioWare developers, who routinely said many times and made it abundantly clear that they felt like they were doing Dragon Age in space. This feels a lot like Dragon Age. It's very Dragon Age, were some of the things that kept coming up. Geider himself said there was a lot of resistance from the team who didn't want to see a sci-fi Dragon Age, I guess. A lot of people were like, why are we telling the same story? Let's do something different. So inside there's a lot of dissension and debate, a lot of butting heads. And I guess I can understand what everyone was saying. The original vision for this game seemed like a drastic departure from the standard fare of BioWare games. And David seemed to be going back to the same sort of tropes. He seemed to be most comfortable with fantasy sci-fi. He said maybe they assumed the idea for it came from me. I'm not sure, but comments like it's very Dragon Age kept coming up regarding any of the work me and my team did, and not in a complimentary manner. There were a lot of people who wanted a say over Anthem's story and kept articulating a desire to do something different without really being clear on what that was outside of it's not being anything BioWare had done before, which was apparently a bad thing. From my perspective, it was rather frustrating. In 2016, Geiger left BioWare and said, as time passed, I didn't feel keen to play the game I was working on, which led to new writers for Anthem and a total story reboot. This led to even more chaos. As you can imagine, writing for BioWare sets the foundation for all the games. When writing is unsure of what's going on or what it's doing, it causes a lot of destruction to a lot of departments. It then became evidently clear, as I've just read, that nobody knew exactly what Anthem was supposed to be, but it wasn't supposed to be what they'd done before. The article pretty much reads off as everyone had a vision, but they all didn't coincide together, which is kind of weird that this is BioWare, you know? The vision of BioWare from the gamer's perspective was they were one of the best in the business. They wrote some of the best stories. They had some of the best games. And everything seemed polished together, thought out. Then you see behind the iron EA curtain, and it just seemed like utter chaos. And I quote, "The root cause of all of this was a lack of vision," said one former BioWare developer. "What are we making? Please tell us." The reoccurring theme was, there was no vision. There was no clarity. There was no single director saying this is how it all works together. They never seemed to settle on anything. They were always looking for something more, something new. I think most people on the team felt like we didn't know exactly what the game was or what it was supposed to be because it kept changing so much. And I quote, "That would just happen over and over," said one Anthem developer. Stuff would take a year or two to figure out because no one really wanted to make a call on it. So at the time of Andromeda's very, very publicly damning looking trailers that were literally being destroyed, like the trailers would come out and you see the horrible voice acting, the horrible animation, and you look and go, oh my God, this is horrible. Everybody thought like, it's the shitty BioWare team that's doing that. The good BioWare team, wait till they come out. When Edmonton makes their game, it'll be great. We won't have these problems. And meanwhile, Edmonton was in pre-production for years on a game no one knew what the fuck it was. Reading this article is just staggering. I read it yesterday and then went to bed because it was long as hell. I sat for a long time reading this over and over again, trying to commit stuff to memory, but it was just far too hard. You know, I got to remember the right mixture of cocaine with heroin. Complicating these problems further was the fact that sometimes when the Anthem leadership team did make decisions, it could take weeks or even months for them to see it in action. The explanation for this lag can be summed up in one word, a word that has plagued many of EA studios for years. That word, of course, is Frostbite. And I quote, "Frostbite is full of razor blades," one former BioWare employee told me a few weeks ago. God, the Frostbite engine. I remember the Frostbite engine came out. It was around the time of Modern Warfare 2. It was like right at the end of Modern Warfare 2. It was still popular, but it was like a few months old. And DICE was showing off their Frostbite engine in Battlefield 3. It was like, honestly, it was a beautiful game. Battlefield 3 still looks good to this day. And I remember when Battlefield was shown and thinking to myself, wow, this is next level shit. Like, Call of Duty is dead. Look at all the stuff you can do in Battlefield. Oh my God, amazing. Now when I hear about Frostbite, the only thing I ever think is Patrick Sutherland and how many times game developers have worked with it to make games and found nothing but issues or had to scale back vision because, frankly, EA wants to make money. And to do so, they're using their in-house engine. That way they don't have to pay royalties or anything. And not paying royalties, they save cash, but the product suffers. And in the end, you know, the bigwigs, the people in charge, don't give a rat's ass if the game suffers or it doesn't live up to expectations or none of the features that were promised during the game. Long as it's made, it meets the deadline by a certain physical quarter and they get their money. Frostbite is a video game engine or suite of technology that is used to make a game. Created by EA's own Swedish studio, DICE, in order to make Battlefield shooters, the Frostbite engine became ubiquitous across Electronic Arts this past decade thanks to an initiative led by the former executive Patrick Sutherland to get all the studios on the same technology. By using Frostbite rather than a third-party engine like Unreal, those studios could share knowledge and save a whole lot of money and licensing fees. It was more about saving money than anything else. BioWare first shifted to Frostbite for Dragon Age Inquisition in 2011, which caused massive problems for the team. Many of the features those developers had taken for granted in previous engines, like save and load system and a third-person camera, simply did not exist in Frostbite, which meant that the Inquisition team had to build them all from scratch. Mass Effect Andromeda ran into similar issues. Surely the third time would be the charm. And as you already know, that wasn't the case. I honestly feel like Patrick Sutherland was detrimental to EA. I really do. He was a man that I really don't feel knew gaming. You know, he was an executive first. I don't feel he knew what people wanted. And I don't think he understood what would coincide with what the community or the people who supported the franchises were interested in. Sutherland only saw money and pretty graphics and virtue signaling, as we all know with Battlefield 5. So sadly, they'd fight with this engine to get the stuff to work. They figure out they could get it to work, but then they literally have to do everything from scratch with this engine to have it implemented and work flawlessly. And it's just like, oh boy, do you do it or do you let it go? Like a bad relationship. The shortcomings of the Frostbite engine became painfully and more evidently clear while reading this article. It's sad that EA would put their developers through this, not giving them the option to use a third-party engine. I mean, really. You'd think that as a game developer and as game publishers, you think the game publishers would allow the developers to use something they're comfortable with. But since the gaming industry is so hell-bent on money, it's just like, outcome be damned. You'll use Frostbite, we'll save money, and whatever happens, we'll fix it later. The article states, even today, BioWare developers say Frostbite can make their jobs exponentially more difficult. Building new iterations on levels and mechanics can be challenging due to the sluggish tools, while bugs that should take a few minutes to squash might require days of back and forth conversations. And I quote, "If it takes you a week to make a little bug fix, it discourages people from fixing bugs." This would explain why there's so many bugs in Anthem. I mean, I can understand. I can sympathize. Completely. You edit enough videos, you miss a slight rendering point where you're trying to stabilize a video, you're just like, screw it. I had enough. I've been doing this for 12 hours. Eat me. If you can hack around it, you hack around it, as opposed to fixing it properly, said the second developer. It's hard enough to make a game, said the third developer. It's really hard to make a game when you have to fight your own tool set all the time. You would hope that after this, EA and the top guys at BioWare who basically tell the fledglings, don't worry, the BioWare magic is coming. I can sense it in the air. I can taste it. You taste that? It's BioWare's magic. Can I use something other than Frostbite? Shut the fuck up, Terry. You're lucky you're still here. Oh my god. This part of the article is so damning. It's ridiculous. It shows you exactly where EA's mind is. Once you read this part, you probably won't have to read it because I'm reading it to you. But I would strongly urge people to check out the article for themselves. It's a long read though. Let's see. What the article clearly states in this area is that the BioWare team was understaffed. They lacked manpower. They were at a fraction of the size of developers like the ones who did Destiny, so basically Bungie, or The Division with Ubisoft. They were literally a small portion of what was needed to create this game. There were a number of reasons for this. One was that in 2016, the FIFA games had to move to Frostbite. The annual soccer franchise was EA's most important series, bringing in a large chunk of the publisher's revenue. And BioWare had programmers with Frostbite experience, so Electronic Arts shifted them to FIFA. That's correct. EA literally poached its own developers to put them on FIFA.
For God's sakes!
FIFA makes EA around $1 billion a year. Alright, last I checked 2 years ago was over 800 million. I'm going to guess that they're at about $1 billion now. Even though they lost Belgium, they're still making a lot of money. So EA's fundamental thing that matters more than anything else is FIFA. Literally, that is like the golden goose for EA. Everything takes a backseat to FIFA. And it shows you how little they care for anything other than games that turn huge profits. So don't expect to see anything new or different from EA if they can't monetize it. And let's face it, everything they do is for the games as a service movement. Everything is games as a service. So in the long run, this is where we're heading with games from EA, no doubt about it. If it ain't gonna be filled with microtransactions, EA ain't doing it. That's probably why Visceral Games' Star Wars game got killed. Because it was a single player experience with no online crap, and probably putting in microtransactions wouldn't yield great results. I'm pretty sure Capcom, even though Devil May Cry 5 is probably one of the most popular Capcom games in years, it has microtransactions, but I highly doubt anyone's buying them. Single player game, single player experience, that's not where EA's head is at. I think Western developers in general, Western game publishers in general, only care about blind blistering profits. When you look at like the Eastern developers and publishers, the emphasis is on story still. The emphasis is still on character development, still on single player games. Say what you want about like Sony, you gotta hand it to them. They're like putting out a lot of great single player games that aren't hell bent on microtransactions. Whereas to everything that seems like it's from America is leaning so heavily towards this money-making model that is unsustainable. I mean, it really is. Even Ubisoft is following down the same path. They put out less games, but all the games have an ecosystem around some sort of BS where they could sell you crap later on. And I quote, "A lot of really talented engineers were actually working on FIFA when they should have been working on Anthem," said one person who was on the project. So not only were they losing devs to work on FIFA, but it was hard to get an influx of new people because it's cold as fuck out there. Why not just move the office? I mean, that would have been my move if I was EA. Well, but then again, if I was EA, it would be a different company. If I was like a head guy at EA, it would have been so different. So I would have been fired. They would have got rid of me quickly. Who is this idiot who's focusing on storytelling? We're not making enough revenue from microtransactions. Fire this guy. Deeper into the article, because this is long, it's quite funny as well as sad. Some developers will bring up concerns to directors, problems, etc. You come to management saying, look, we're seeing some problems on Inquisition and Andromeda, where design wasn't figuring things out. It's getting really late in the project and the core of the game isn't defined. And management would pretty much ignore them. Like, don't worry about it. That BioWare magic, it's coming. Be silent, fool. You don't believe. You heretic. Also, apparently, the developers working on Anthem saw that the game was pretty much a loot shooter akin to The Division and Destiny. And these became taboo things to say in BioWare. Literally, Destiny was like a bad word. That's amazing. Making a game that's a clone of other things and then pretending like they weren't doing. It's almost like with YouTube, where you see all the thumbnails match each other and you can't tell which YouTuber uploaded it. I get confused all the time as to who's posting what because everybody sort of follows this like regiment of what thumbnails are supposed to look like. Few guys shake things up. And I quote here, a few people who worked on the game said that trying to make comparisons to Destiny would elect negative reactions from studio leadership. And I quote, we were told quite definitively, this isn't Destiny, said one developer. But it kind of is. What you're describing is beginning to go into that realm. They don't want to make those correlations, but at the same time, when you're talking about fire teams and going off and doing raids together about gun combat, spells, and things like that, well, there's a lot of elements there that correlate, that cross over. Literally, it was EA's version of Destiny. And I don't even understand how the hell could the leadership of BioWare have their developers going, listen, we're going down this path here, and it's very obvious that this is what it is. And the guys at the top are like, no, it isn't. Stop that. No, that's not what this is. It has nothing to do with Destiny. If I recall correctly, reading further into that, the developers would sit there and then go to lead, like, well, we're kind of doing something similar to the D word, but we're not doing things to the D word. But maybe we should see what the D word is doing so that we could get things right because they understand what they're doing with this type of game mechanic. And we're kind of twisting in the wind here. And the upper management would go, shut up, Harold. No one pays you to think. Get back to working on the game that is so big and grandiose we don't have any idea of what it is. But when the BioWare magic sets in, it will all come together soon. You will see, non-believer. Now, to condense this, I tried to cut as much as I possibly could from the article at Kotaku, simply because it's just too big. It's huge. This is literally as I probably said before, this is like Watergate of gaming. And I have to say, Jason Schreier's journalism here, this is journalism, honestly. This is something I haven't seen in gaming journalism in a while, where there's so much here that it's, what do they say? Consumable bites is some crap on YouTube, when it's like you take articles and it's your job to make it more consumable for people. But I would strongly urge people to read this. Anyway, I'm going to try and keep cutting it down and only hitting the major points as best I can. I know I missed the part where Destiny was originally called Beyond, but they couldn't secure the rights, so some bigwig at Electronic Arts was like, all right, it's now Anthem, so let it be written, so let it be done. Get the intern in here, Toby. Now I'm going to try and, let's do this. I'm going to try and hit this correctly, because I didn't take notes on this part, but it was a very important part, I felt. Around the time of Christmas, BioWare developers got a copy of the Anthem demo to take home, play, test out, and they decided to remove the flying mechanics. Apparently in Destiny, they took out the flying mechanics and they put it back in, and they took it out, and the problem was every time you'd have the flying mechanic in, the game's map had to change drastically in order to accommodate that and make it feasible, whereas to like a player couldn't just fly clean off the map, you know what I'm saying? Whereas to when you're on the ground, it's easier to control player movement. So this proved to be a bane of existence for the BioWare developers. So around the Christmas time season in 2016, the demo also made it into the hands of Patrick Sutherland. As I said before, the man lacked vision, in my opinion. He wasn't half as astute as he believed himself to be. Anyway, I'll try this part. Electronic Arts executive Patrick Sutherland, to whom BioWare leadership reported, played the Anthem Christmas demo. According to 3 people familiar with what happened, he told BioWare that it was unacceptable. Sutherland did not respond to a request for comment. Obviously, he wouldn't. He was particularly disappointed by the graphics. He said, "This is not what you had promised me as a game," said one person whom was there. Then those developers said Sutherland summoned a group of high-level BioWare staff to fly out to Stockholm, Sweden, and meet with developers at DICE, the studio behind Battlefield and Frostbite. DICE would later bring a strike team to help BioWare work out the Frostbite kinks and make Anthem look prettier. Pretty much, Sutherland's biggest gripe with the game was it wasn't pretty enough. It's like game mechanics, story. There was no story, by the way, at the time of this. None of that mattered to Sutherland. His issue was the game wasn't pretty enough. And I will admit, to this day, Anthem's pretty. It's not as good as it's not good looking like it was the E3 demo, but still, it's a good looking game. But it lacked everything else. It lacked substance. It lacked reason. The game was so repetitive. I'll give Anthem this. It at least was a bit more interesting to me than The Division. I played the Division 2 private beta and got bored real quick, and Zill kept going, "No, I'm done playing this. Fuck this." And I'm like, dude, we have to do it for like no refunds. The YouTube channel you pushed me to create, so we do stuff like this, and you refuse to do it. This isn't how you work a job, But anyway, Anthem's decent looking, but that's all it's got going for it. The shooting mechanic's cool, flying around's all right, and the game looks good, in my opinion. But everything else with with Anthem is just forgettable. It's basic, really. I honestly feel like Anthem has potential to be good, but who wants to wait that long? Who wants to wait for, BioWare to turn Anthem around? I'm not into games like that. I'm sorry. As a gamer, even though I'm not even done with the article, but I'm just pontificating here. As a gamer, I want to play a game when it comes out, and I want to enjoy it then. I don't want to buy a game and then sit there and go, well, it's not what I expected. It's not very interesting, but the developers assured me in another year or two it'll be fine. It'll be better then. Well, then why not release the game then instead of now? It's almost like we're paying for early access, and then we're expected to come back later, enjoy the game, and then reward them with microtransaction payments. And I just can't get with that. I can't. Like, For Honor, it seemed like such a great game from Ubisoft. And then, it just launched this fucking mess. It was interesting, but it was still a fucking mess. And now it's better, but who cares? Except for, like, the few people that still play For Honor. I'm not into that. I'm sick of that. The same with, like, what was the other game I used to play and liked for 5 minutes? But it was just such a mess from Ubisoft. Shit, name one. There's a couple. Siege, that's it. Siege, when it launched, mess. Still liked it, but it was a mess. And by the time I got tired of all the bugs and issues with Siege, I stopped playing. Siege is better now, I guess, yeah, but who cares? For me personally, I'm just not into that. Siege now exists to give yearly season passes. Remember when a season pass was it? There was only one season pass? Now we're in this multiple season pass bullshit. It's ridiculous. Forgive me. Let me get back on point. So after Sutherland got his hands on the demo and he was displeased and it was too ugly for him to look at, the BioWare devs were shitting bricks. DICE was flown out to help him make the game look better and work out a couple kinks. I'm not sure if I took a clip from it, but there's another part in this article with the Frostbite engine that BioWare was on the lowest rung of the totem pole because EA specifically had a team that was like this team you could call or send messages to, and they would get back to you and help you with whatever issues you had with the Frostbite engine. And since BioWare's Anthem wasn't something high up in the market, they didn't think Anthem would make a lot of money. BioWare rarely got help with the Frostbite engine when they ran into bugs and issues. Whereas to the team like FIFA, if they had any issue, they got someone on the line real quick. When I was reading that, my first thought was, oh my God, this is a lot like YouTube. It's a lot like YouTube. If you're a YouTuber with a couple million subscribers and your channel is healthy and makes a lot of money and you don't really get copyright strikes or whatever the case may be, YouTube has partner manager channel thingies that help you immediately. They're like, anything happens to your channel, they're there to help you like that. Whereas to guys like me, you know, I don't know why people say I'm a celebrity on YouTube. I'm not. But anyway, guys like me, we have an issue, we're twisted in the wind because we don't matter that much. So once again, I can sympathize with BioWare. It's like you run into an issue and you're so low on the priority list, nobody bothers to get back to you about fixing something. So it's like you take the L or you figure it out yourself. Let me get back to this. I apologize. So after Sutherland was displeased, the BioWare team went back and added the flying mechanic, which they were wishy-washy on back and forth. And the funny thing is, they added the flying mechanic specifically for Sutherland. They weren't 100% sure they were going to keep it. They're like, we're going to do this. We're going to add flying so it can make Patrick Sutherland happy. Then later on, we might remove it again. Talk about like just inconsistency. It's utterly ridiculous. The leadership team's most recent decision had been to remove flying entirely, but they needed to impress Sutherland, and flying was the only mechanic they'd built that made Anthem stand out from other games. So they eventually decided to put it back in. This re-implementation of flying took place over the weekend, according to two people who worked on the game, and it wasn't quite clear whether they were doing it permanently or just as a show for Sutherland. And I quote, we were like, well, that's not in the game. Are we adding it for real? Said one developer. They were like, we'll see. Anthem seems like this National Lampoon sort of bit, honest to God. I sit here and I look at this and it's like, this is more chaotic than my YouTube channel. So in the spring of 2017, Sutherland flew out to Edmonton and made his way to BioWare's office, entourage in tow. Wow, Patrick Sutherland doesn't roll without a crew. What is he, a rapper? I guess you need bodyguards if you're that hated. I'm thinking about getting some. The Anthem team had completely overhauled the art and re-added flying, which they hoped would feel sufficiently impressive. But tensions were high in the wake of the last demo's disappointment and Mass Effect Andromeda's high-profile failure. There was no way to know what might happen if Sutherland again would disapprove of the demo. Would the project get canceled? Would BioWare be in trouble? That's just sad. One of the biggest developers in the industry could be destroyed in an instant. Patrick Sutherland was literally like Thanos. If he wasn't pleased, a snap of the finger, your studio dissolved. Mr. Sutherland, I don't feel so good. One of the Q&A people had been playing it over and over again so they could get the flow and the timing down perfectly, said one person who was involved with the 30 seconds or so, the exo jump-offs and glides off his precipice and landings. Then according to two people who were in the room, Patrick Sutherland was stunned. And I quote, he turned around and goes, that was fucking awesome. Show it to me again, said one person who was there and was like, that was amazing. It's exactly what I wanted. This 30-second clip was actually all rehearsed footage. Oh, wow. That is damning. They literally made a 30-second video where the guy was practicing as if he was in the Olympics doing a pole vault to make sure it all seems seamless and beautiful. Wow. Oh, man. This article, it almost feels like a death sentence for Anthem. It's just like AAA gaming is so fucked, and there's nothing anyone can do to save it. The demo became the foundation for the 7-minute long gameplay trailer that BioWare showed the public a few weeks later in June 2017, just a few days after the last-minute name change from Beyond to Anthem. BioWare boss Aaron Flynn took the stage at E3's 20th press conference to announce the game the next day. Okay, wow. Literally everything at E3 was not real. Everything from the E3 game demo that they told us was in-game wasn't real. Like, we all knew it. Most of us knew it. Most people knew it. Like, the people who are, you know, jaded from gaming. The sad thing is, being aware of reality and what's going on tends to make you not think the world is that awesome and everything's kind of bullshit because you see behind the curtain, you know? It's like the Wizard of Oz. You're looking behind the curtain. It's like, hey, it's an old white man. And he's like, pay no mind to the old white man behind the curtain. I'm the great Wizard of Oz. And everybody else is like, he is the Wizard of Oz, you fuckhead. Get away from the curtain before he kills you. I feel bad for BioWare because had they actually got their hands on an engine that was more malleable to what they had envisioned, Anthem probably could have been an amazing game. After the E3 demo was shown, a lot of the developers that worked on Anthem pretty much said this, and I quote, "After E3, that's when it really felt like, okay, this is the game we're making," said one Anthem developer. But it still felt like it took a while to get the entire team up to speed. It was also kind of tricky because there were still a lot of question marks. The demo was not actually built properly. A lot of it was fake, like most E3 demos. There was a lot of stuff that was like, oh, are we actually doing this? Question mark. Do we have the tech for that? Do we have the tools for that? To what end can you fly? How big should the world be? At E3 2017, BioWare announced that Anthem would launch in fall of 2018. Behind the scenes, however, they had barely implemented a single mission, and the drama was just getting worse. Oh my god. Due to recent circumstances and the ever-declining quality of BioWare games, the fans started to refer to studios using derogatory terms. That's what Jason Schreier said, not me. Now, when you look at this, the derogatory term was A team, B team, and C team. If that's a derogatory term to be called A, B, or C team, I don't know what to say to that's not even derogative. That's quite kind. I wish women would refer to me as plan A, B, or C rather than numbnuts, douchebag, and loser. The A team for BioWare was the Dragon Age and Mass Effect trilogy BioWare. The B team was the Texas BioWare that made the Star Wars Old Republic online game. And C team was obviously the BioWare that made Mass Effect Andromeda. The article also states that what fans didn't realize is that most of the BioWare teams felt exactly the same. There was like a pecking order within BioWare, which is not really surprising to me, honestly. I mean, it's life, it's competition. In motorcycle racing, your biggest rival is the dude that's on the same team with you. The same with Formula One, etc. And if you're the 9-time world champion and the guy next to you is only, I don't even think he's been world champion, well, fuck that guy, you're number one. And I quote, "Anthem is the game you get from a studio that was at war with itself," said one former BioWare developer. Edmonton understandably has the perspective of, we are the original BioWare. Anybody not part of the brand is lesser. After the E3 demo was shown and many of BioWare had some idea of what they were making, BioWare Austin was now put into the mix. BioWare Austin was the ones behind the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic online game, so they had some experience in online gameplay. Sadly, it seemed like the pecking order didn't work in the favor of Anthem at all. Anthem's lack of vision in Edmonton was even more pronounced in Austin, whose developers suddenly found themselves working on a game they didn't quite understand. Was it an online shooter like Destiny, or was it a role-playing game? How do you get around in the world? What would the missions look like? One of the things we struggled with was we didn't understand the game's concept, said one former BioWare Austin developer. When Anthem was presented to us, it was never really clear what the game was. Which is weird, because everybody thought they had an idea what it was after E3. It seemed like an up and down roller coaster of highs and lows, but mainly lows. And I quote, they were still finding a vision for the game. I saw multiple presentations given to the entire studio trying to define what Anthem was about. The Hollywood elevator pitch version of Anthem was, when we talk about Anthem, what we mean is X. I saw many variations over time. And that was indicative of how much conflict there was over trying to find a vision for this game. So still at this point, not only did no one know what it was about, everyone had their own direction for what they wanted the game to be, and it didn't all just gel. Everybody was off in a different direction. When the smoke cleared, the pecking order was all that remained. BioWare Edmonton was basically the flagship. Edmonton would come up with the vision, and Austin would execute on it, which caused tension between the two studios. BioWare Austin developers would recall offering feedback only to get dismissed or ignored by BioWare Edmonton's senior leadership team. It seemed like the Edmonton leadership team was really out of touch with all the developers, even in their own studios while reading this article. It almost seemed staggering. When BioWare Austin, who were behind Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic Online, learn from its mistakes with said game, one developer would describe it as a culture clash between the two groups of developers in Edmonton who are used to making single-player box product games. And I quote, "We tell them, this is not going to work. Look at these story things you're doing. It's going to split up the player's experience," said one Austin developer. "We've already been through this all with the Old Republic. We knew what it was like when players felt like they were getting rushed through story missions because the other players were in their headsets going, come on, let's go. Sounds exactly like Ziltex. And we'd bring up this repeatedly, and we were ignored." So BioWare Edmonton would be given on numerous occasions, not just from Austin, but from their own developers, would tell them that there were glaring problems with the game, and the senior leadership team would either ignore these problems or rely on that old BioWare magic. On June 29th of 2017, BioWare's Mark Dara, I probably got that wrong, published a tweet that may have seemed odd. He alluded to that he wasn't working on Anthem, Mass Effect, Jade Empire, or Dragon Age Tactic games, or a Star Wars game. The implication that he was pretty much perceiving is that he was producing Dragon Age 4. At the time, this was true. This iteration of Dragon Age was codenamed Joplin, I believe. Joplin, probably got that wrong. And those who were working on it have told me they were excited by the creative direction Mike Laidlaw's vision for the project was. But it seemed that it wasn't to be so. From what I recall in the article, because I'm not quite sure if I took a note from this because I don't see it, BioWare shifted, or the senior management of BioWare shifted all of its people to work on Anthem, thus pretty much killing the ambitious Dragon Age 4 project. And I believe Mike left BioWare after that had happened. In the beginning of 2018, developers' recollection, Anthem's progress was so far behind that they'd only implemented a single mission. Most of the high-level designs had not been finalized, like loots, javelin powers, etc. The writing was still also in flux. They talked a lot about the 6-year development time, but really the core gameplay loop, the story, and all the missions in the game were made in the last 12 to 16 months because of the lack of vision and total lack of leadership across the board, said one developer. This would explain a lot about Anthem as a whole. The game seemed empty, which, you know, it's weird to get confirmation of your beliefs and thoughts. Being one of those YouTubers that sit there and gives my opinion, because that's all it really is, and looking at things from what I feel is a realistic standpoint, but I do know that I suffer from depression, and I tend to have the shit stained glasses. You know how some people have rose-colored glasses? My glasses are made with shit. So, like, I look at the world through my shit lenses, and everything seems like shit. I know, highly descriptive. But when I looked at Anthem and played it, the overall feeling I had was this is a half-baked game. It was empty. It was devoid. And it seemed like every day, if not every other day, a new bug, a new issue, a new flaw just kept coming up with Anthem. Reddit was ablaze with posts from people coming into a litany of issues. The fact that Anthem was turning off PlayStation 4s. One guy sent me a video that I posted on my Twitter where his Xbox completely bricked from Anthem, and he had proof. EA and Anthem, EA and BioWare said that these things aren't real, that blah, 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 but whatever. It seemed like there was a never-ending problem with the game. And when you read that it was finalized in the last 12 to 16 months of its development, it says a lot. And it's hard to place blame more than on EA, because let's face it, EA is usually the root of all the issues, and the senior management of BioWare that seems to be completely out of touch with even their own developers. The level of dissension that was going on is nothing short of staggering. It's almost like a government imploding in on itself. Everyone with their own vision, these little fiefdoms of developers who decided Anthem will be this, while the other group of developers says Anthem should be that. And caught in the middle was BioWare Austin, who was basically like, a lot of these features aren't working for online play. And Edmonton's like, shut up. We're the original BioWare. We'll decide what works and what doesn't, you phoebe. So while Anthem was going through its very odd 6-year development time, the gaming landscape had changed. Electronic Arts has gone all in on the regularly updated games as service. I hate that term so much. When I hear that, I know the game is going to be a Harlow piece of shit, where they'll pull out a roadmap and tell me exactly what I'm going to get a year from now. You know, oh, we've got a long plan for the game. Hopefully you'll stay engaged and buy all these expansions, you fucking idiot. Remember when like games like World of Warcraft actually had stuff that came out that was worth your time? Final Fantasy XI had expansions. Final Fantasy XIV had expansions. Right now, like, what we get from AAA is literally like content that you could barely call content. There are mods that are up for free on the Nexus for Fallout games that are bigger than what Bethesda has planned for Fallout 76 as a fucking whole in a year. I gotta let it go, or I'll start flipping out. I gotta try and get through this. Anyway, EA was struggling in key areas, closing Visual Games in San Francisco and facing serious drama at its ambitious EA Motive Studio in Montreal. The Star Wars Battlefront 2 pay-to-win debacle led to the reinvigorated public hatred for all things Electronic Arts and a publisher-wide reboot of all things loot box. Even as EA executives continuously push for all their games to have the long-term monetization plans, Anthem included, EA has been public about its disdain for linear games that can easily be returned to GameStop after a single playthrough. That's because EA doesn't get a piece of that replay money. That's why the industry is really pushing towards digital copies of games. I remember when the AAA gaming industry was sitting there and saying, if we do digital downloads, the games will be cheaper because it's so expensive to produce the CDs and the boxes. And now, when you buy a digital version of a game, it's the same price as like the fucking hard copy. In fact, from what I see of consoles, you buy a hard copy of the game and you still got to download the fucking game again. It's ridiculous. And these long-term monetization plans, honest to God, it's almost like EA can't see itself. Putting out these games, these long-term monetization plans, feel so soulless. Gaming isn't even an art form anymore. It's all about putting out a product and then fixing it later and hoping to collect money off of us now. You know, it's horrible. Imagine if Leonardo da Vinci, or was it Michelangelo that painted the Mona Lisa? You know, he was commissioned to do the paint job, and then he only did a couple layers of paint and then said, well, now you got to pay for the DLC, my friend. I have a long-term monetization plan for painting this for you, but you have to come through with some extra money. You want to be able to see her hair better? That's going to cost you. I mean, what happened to the gaming medium as an art form? I'll tell you what happened. It became corporate. It became soulless. It became about getting as much money as humanly possible. That is the first and foremost plan. That's why movies suck now. No one is taking a chance. The music industry is dying. That's why these assholes are on YouTube trying to claim every video they can. Up, you played 3 seconds of our song. We own the whole video. It's all our money, you thief. People only came to your video for 3 seconds of our song. But it was in the middle of my video. They knew it was there. They could sense it. They could taste it. They could feel that quality content. In 2018, Anthem was in such flux that many of the major features that were discussed publicly last year never made it to the game. Oh God, I forgot about this. A Game Informer cover story on Anthem published in July of 2018 detailed the skill tree system and how it would apply to players' builds of exosuits and pilots in unique ways. The funny thing is, like, Anthem has been such a shitstorm. Most of us have totally forgotten about the skill tree. I totally forgot about that. That is sad. There's so much of what Anthem was supposed to be was stripped away. What we literally have with Anthem is like a shell of its former self. All the visions, the plans, the ideas, even simple skill trees, gone. Everything was focused on just getting it out and then probably fixing it later. It really, like, you just think about it, the lack of a skill tree, the only thing that defines your javelin from anyone else's javelin is how wacky you can get the color scheme. That's pretty much it. Your character is this faceless, empty thing. The story really isn't affected by your decisions. And I quote, "I don't know how accurate this is," says one BioWare developer, "but it felt like the entire game was basically built in the last 6 to 9 months. You couldn't play it. There was nothing there. It was just this crazy final rush. The hard part is, how do you make a decision when there's no game? There's nothing to play. So yeah, you're going to keep questioning yourself." This might also explain why there are so many bugs that BioWare had no idea of. It seems like they just went out of their way to try and get the game done within EA's time frame. This article later states that EA pretty much had a deadline that BioWare had to fill. Which, you know, it's sad really, because it didn't give them enough time to work out the kinks. It was like do or die. Literally, these people were probably crunching crazy hours to make sure the game just got out, and whatever the hell happened, we'll fix it later sort of mentality. On one hand, that sort of deadline crunch where it has to meet a certain physical quarter year for earnings is sad because it leads to games like this. But on the other hand, without deadlines, you end up with the Star Citizen, where like the game says it's coming out one year, the year comes, and then they're like, we don't have a release date. Then they'll give you a possible release date like 4 years from now. You still might not even see it. There isn't some sort of wall there to keep them from adding shit continuously. It's really like the gaming industry is such a slippery slope. And unfortunately, BioWare and Anthem has just suffered from being a cog in the machine. One mandate for Anthem's director had been to make the game unmemeable, a reaction to Mass Effect Andromeda's jittery face animations, which became an internet joke in the days leading up to the game's release. For Anthem, the team used high-end performance capture in order to ensure that the characters couldn't be turned into embarrassing GIFs and plastered all over Reddit. It's like a mandate. We have to make sure that these characters don't look stupid. Do you hear me? The sad thing is the facial animations were great for Anthem, but they also seem soulless. I recall reading in this article somewhere that there were points where the performance capture could only be done in a day or something. And the developers had to really crunch this shit in, which led to issues. Like if something changed in the story, literally the characters' facial animations and the way they talked about things didn't coincide with it. So if someone's javelin was destroyed, I was reading somewhere in here, the characters didn't even really acknowledge it. Some instances, characters would be sitting and talking about a character standing next to them, but they were talking as if the character wasn't in the room. There was absolutely no room to fix this because there was no money left in the budget to do it again. So literally, they had to work with what they had. And I quote, "It's a really strong example of the type of problems that befell us," said another developer. "Why couldn't they change this? It's not that nobody wanted to. It's because when we set the course with these huge assets, we're sometimes stuck with them." Talk about a rock and a hard place. It must be a nightmare being a developer for EA. It must be a nightmare being a developer for BioWare. It just seems like this whole thing, from beginning to end, was this, I guess the way to put it is, Anthem is a perfect example of the road to hell is paved in good intentions. What started out as a fantastic idea that seemed truly next-gen, almost revolutionary, something that would take BioWare from the usual formula, had turned into some sort of monster, some sort of homunculus. This deformed version of an original vision that didn't come to fruition, plagued by indecisions, indecisiveness. Here's a damning omission that was later said in the article. Could be close to the end. I don't, honest to God, remember. It's so huge. Anthem developers say they had a hard time looking at the game holistically. It was tough to zoom out and get a feel for what it'd be like to play 40, 60, or 80 hours of Anthem when entire missions weren't even finished. How could you tell if the loot drop rates were balanced when you couldn't even play through the whole game? How could you assess whether the game felt grindy or repetitive when the story wasn't even finished yet? They were literally going in completely blind. They were balls deep into a bad situation, and there was no way but forward. And it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous to read this. It's this article pretty much makes it worse than you thought it was, you know? Most of us who played Anthem, or even the demos, got this sort of feeling. We had this whole idea in our heads that EA and BioWare knew what they were doing, and they were doing this on purpose to weasel money out of people. There was like a Reddit post where there's this whole elaborate AI system designed to scheme and take people's money. And the funny thing is, it wasn't even that. It was just sheer incompetence. There was no grandiose plan. It wasn't Lex Luthor at the helm figuring out how to take out Superman. It was literally Gregory from Starbucks who jammed the coffee machine with paper clips by mistake. The dev also said that the build was unstable. It was difficult to even log in and test for bugs. And I quote, "I think there was an entire week where I couldn't do anything because there's server issues," said one person who worked in the game. Another said that the team had to test out approved levels offline, which was a strange choice for missions that were meant to be played by 4 people. So, a couple months before Anthem was to be shipped, decisions were made and still being finalized as well as overhauled. At one point, for example, the leadership team realized that there was no place for the game to show off your gear, which was a problem for a game in which the long-term monetization was all based on cosmetics. That's right, they realized, oh shit, we need to be able to let players show off their gear hardcore style. What will we do? The whole point of this is microtransactions. Patrick Sutherland will beat my feet if there's no microtransactions. The whole point is for you to spend money on outfits for your javelins. Colors, textures, etc. Decals, the whole 9 yards. But the city of Fort Tartarus, or whatever it's called, I never bothered to learn it because I really didn't care about the story, was privately instanced, as you already know if you've played the game or the demo. So the team brought in EA's Motive Studio in Montreal to build the Launch Bay, a last-minute addition to the game where you can hang out and show off your gear to strangers.
Where is your guard? Where is your guard now?
That's right. They took out time. Instead of bug fixing, making the story better or anything, they had to make sure there was an area for players to show off their gear because microtransactions, you filthy pleb.
Loot boxes. Loot boxes have made headlines over the past year, and you, the moronic, gobbling maw of consumer idiocy that you are, have shown little to no regret in just plain dumping your money into this deeply insulting monetization model.
The article also touches on when the writer Drew Karpyshyn left BioWare, as well as many other developers that were equally as good, equally as important, but not too many people knew them because their name wasn't sort of a big thing. And many of them left, including a lot of BioWare veterans, went to Implorable Games. I've never even heard of this developer. But apparently, this is a technology company that has recently announced plans to develop its own games. Oh, well, Errol Flynn is also there too. This might be something to pay attention to. Oh, wait, it's Improbable. What the fuck is wrong with me? Improbable Games, forgive me. So anyway, when some original BioWare heavyweights have gone there, maybe they'll pump out a game people actually want. I also forgot to mention in this article, sadly, I forgot to clip it. I've cut many snippets from this article over the course of a day, and there's so much on it. I urge people to read it because I'm glossing over as much as possible to make it condensed, and I'm probably failing at that right now. This is like a podcast level video that probably doesn't belong on my main channel. But anyway, there was also talk for the Austin BioWare. They had Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, a new Star Wars game, dangled in front of them like a carrot, but it never came to fruition, which is sad when you think about that. If EA really wanted to do well with people, just let BioWare make a single-player Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic game. But it's never going to happen because EA is all about games as service. And reading this article, it becomes evidently and painfully clear that the dream of Star Wars, the Knights of the Old Republic 3 will never happen unless Disney yanks the IP from EA. And I know some people sit there and go, well, you know, Lucasfilms is back, Disney brought him back, well, we'll see what the fuck they do. Because frankly, if you recall, Disney hasn't been knocking Star Wars out of the park. You've seen the movies. Have you seen the new animated TV show? Do you really think Disney is going to do something that fans would really want and be fine with? Without, Disney would so meddle in LucasArts if they decided to do a Knights of the Old Republic. And anyway, Slice, let me just move on. At the end of 2018, those who remained with Anthem wished they had more time to polish the game, honestly. It became clear to everyone that the game wouldn't ship with as much content as fans expected. They came up with some artificial solutions to extend the campaign, like the challenges of the Legionnaires, a tedious mandatory part of the main story that involves completing grindy quests in order to access tombs across the game's world. Originally, according to the BioWare developers, this mission included time gates that might have forced players to wait days to complete it at all. Fortunately, they changed this before launch. And I quote, "That mission was controversial even within BioWare," said one. The reasoning was to definitely throttle players' movement. That would have been detrimental. Someone at BioWare had their brain working at full capacity and they're like, no, this is a bad idea.
Thank you very much! Finally, somebody's got a brain in here! I thought I was alone! I mean, my God, huh?
It also stated at some points there was room for BioWare staff to be optimistic about the game. Unlike previous games from BioWare, Anthem had room to evolve. Early mock reviews, which are reviews they came up with themselves for the game, good thinking, because you're going to criticize yourself as much as some guy in the middle of Alabaster, Texas, who's having a real rough weekend, and the only solace he has is playing Iron Man in space, and the game isn't really ticking his boxes. Critical assessments provided in an outside consultant predicted that Anthem's metric score would land at the high 70s. Whoever that outside consultant was a fucking idiot. High 70s. This was a low for BioWare game, but the company leadership was fine with that. And I quote, "They had a really strong belief in live service," said one developer. "Issues that were coming up," they said, "were a live service. We'll be supporting this for years to come. We'll fix that later on." Did they learn nothing from Destiny? That's supposed to be a 10-year game. Look what happened there. It turned out the mock reviews have been too generous. Okay, I gotta read this whole thing. I'm not even gonna paraphrase it. "Oh, it's okay to get this out now because we can improve it later. That wasn't the case. Nobody did believe it was this flawed or this broken. Everyone actually thought we had something here, and we think it's pretty good." That's a scary thought to have. I think some of the best pieces of art, the best pieces of music, etc., were always something that the person who created it thought it was a piece of shit, and then everyone else thought it was amazing. I mean, case in point, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. He hated that thing. He wrote it, it was a short story, he thought it was trash. It became the most popular thing Charles Dickens ever did. It must have been a nightmare of which there was no waking. All the rest of your work, people are like, that Christmas Carol, that's where it's at, Charles. While talking to Jason Schreier, a number of former BioWare developers brought up specific complaints that were voiced by players and critics. Then shared anecdotes of how they made those same gripes to the leadership team throughout 2017 and 18 only to be brushed off. So even, like I said before, the leadership team of BioWare is out of touch even with their own workers. Their own devs, they're sitting there going, this isn't going to work. And the leadership team is like, shoo, come back to me when you believe in that BioWare magic, boy. God, I wish I could get to that point. I need like 10, 20 million subscribers so I can be out of touch, please. Can we make that happen, guys? Could we rate, comment, subscribe? Subscribe to Gundam. Forget PewDiePie. Let's move on to the new guy. It's me. I'm the new edgelord. I'm the edgelord. I'm the only guy who's thought about doing a bump to sort of get pep in his step to make videos. I doubt PewDiePie has done more than a Red Bull. At the end of the article, it states that BioWare's Austin office is taking over the live services for Anthem. The Edmonton staff has gradually moved on to other projects, such as Dragon Age 4. But with the way things have gone, I don't think anything's going to change. After reading this, I don't see it changing for the better. The article also states among those who remain at the company, there's still a belief that Anthem can be fixed. That with a few more months, and some patience from players, it will have the same redemption story as so many service games before it, from Diablo 3 to Destiny. Destiny, come on, man. Destiny's not good. I'm sorry, Destiny's not. I have Destiny. They literally gave it to me for free, and I don't care. I don't care. Anthem honestly had something, like, you know that there's something there, but who wants to sit and wait? Most of the people who are willing to give you a chance have already been burned repeatedly, over and over again. Why the hell would they stay? There's so much competition. There's so many other games you can play. Hell, you can go out and live your fucking life. It's better than Anthem. It's more fun to go to a club, get drunk, and get rejected by chicks than sit and play Anthem. Take it from me, I've done it. At least you got some stories afterwards. What stories are you going to tell about Anthem? Well, there was that time when the loot shower came. People be recounting their best moments in Anthem is when the game was bugged. And it brought, like, the greatest phrase ever, the loot shower. I'm going to use that. I'm going to find a way to use the term loot shower in my everyday life. Yet questions linger about BioWare's production practices. Many of those who have left the company over the past years shared concern that the studio's approach to game development were widespread worry that the soul of BioWare has been ripped away. And the belief in BioWare magic has burned too many people out. That too many talented veterans have left. There are things that need to change about how the studio operates, and I quote, said one developer. There are lessons that need to be learned, and the only way they'll get learned is if they become public knowledge. And I'd say Jason Schreier's article has done an amazing job of that. It's the only article I've seen that has passed 1 million shares. Like, this is blowing up like The Godfather. But the question is, would anything change? And I don't think it will. EA put out a statement where they're basically refuting some of this crap and saying yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I don't really care what EA has to say because I care about what EA does. And what EA's done over the past couple of years is kick gamers in the balls, and apparently they're like taskmastering the developers. People are being burnt out to a crisp. They're crying in rooms because they're so tired of development. Something needs to change, but the question is, will it change? And if our government, our everyday lives, are any indication of that, no, it won't change. If we look at it from a realistic perspective, nothing will change. I mean, look at the WWE. Look at all of the shit that's happened to wrestlers over the years. Has anything changed? No. Then John Oliver puts out a video and some normal people wake up and go, wow, this really fucked up what happens to wrestlers. That's because everybody focuses on the wrestlers that do well. For every The Rock, for every Batista, Hulk Hogan, there's hundreds, if not thousands of motherfuckers you don't even remember that are off somewhere damn near dying because they don't have health insurance, and nobody gives a shit except for the most hardcore fans. And the machine rolls on because at the end of the day, it's capitalism. It's AAA gaming. The almighty dollar. That's why it's called that. That's why the shit's on your dollar bill, and God we trust. And you're staring at a fucking dollar bill with an Illuminati symbol. Yeah, that doesn't seem fishy to me. I better stop. You tell too much truth, shit happens to you. I'm gonna start lying. I'm gonna join EA Game Changers. I'm gonna become part of the system, get some money. That way nobody will kill me or some shit. Get my channel deleted. Last thing I need to do is be like Top Hats and Champagne. Everybody's like, I'm sorry it happened to you, brother, but I'm gonna keep doing my thing. Goodbye. Honestly, I have to take my hat off to Jason Schreier. I may not agree with him all the time. I may feel he's got a thin skin on Twitter, but the guy is still a journalist. He's one of the few that I respect in gaming, without a shadow of a doubt. Work is always interesting, awe-inspiring, and at times illuminating. So, big ups to him, I guess. I don't know how to give compliments. You know me, I'm a shitbag. No, you don't have to rate, comment, subscribe to this piece of shit because, frankly, the only thing I did was try and make it shorter, read it to people. It's like a really shitty book on tape. But you know what? Subscribe if you can. Like if you can, or dislike it. It's all engagement. That's all YouTube cares about. I know what it's like to be part of the machine, to be one of the cogs. And it has changed my outlook on Anthem. Before, I just thought it was like a rushed game that was a cash grab. Turns out, it was a game of 6 years of picking ass trying to figure out what to do, infighting, confusion, lack of direction, and then 6 to 12 months of grind. That's what's sad. I suggest people find some new hobbies because I believe it's only going to get worse. The gaming industry is literally going to be, once in a blue moon, a good game comes out, and the rest of it's going to be shit like this. Broken hearts and broken dreams and microtransactions.